Hey guys, Sharpen here. In this video I'm going to show you how you can recreate Virtual Riot's atmospheric pads by turning sounds like these and these into unique pads like these and these. So in case you didn't know, Virtual Riot released a pad sample pack some time ago, which consists of pads like these. And basically all these pads play different chords that you can then pitch shift them, so you can create chord progressions out of all of these unique samples, so you can get very unique sounds out of just one chord progression. So you can, for example, combine this one and this one and this one and get very unique textures while still making just a normal chord progression. So in this video I'm going to show you how you can recreate these in two methods. One method is to synth them, and the other method is to just go out and record very random things until you get sounds that sound good. So let's start with the synth method. So the first thing you want to do is to create a pad. Basically I took this waveform, which sounds like this, and then I added 8 voices of unison, and I lowered the detune by a tiny bit, and then I low passed it at around 700 Hertz. And the next thing I did was add in some additional unison, and some dimension expanding, quite a bit. As you can see, the mix is at around 80%. Sounds like this. And then I added some tiny bit of reverb. It's at around 60% mix, but the size and the decay isn't too long. The decay is at around like 6 seconds, and the size is like at 35%. So then the next thing you need to do is to select a chord. And what you want to do is to select a basic chord, like for example G sharp minor, which is G sharp, B, and D sharp. And then you want to add either ninths or sevenths to add some dimension to your chord to make it sound a bit more jazzy, a bit more interesting. So for example, I added a ninth here, which is A sharp. And as you can see, the next important thing to do is to just play with the upper notes of the chord, change them every once in a while. So you get something like this that can turn into this and then into this. And as you can see, sometimes I'm using just the basic G sharp minor notes, but an octave above, like here and here. But sometimes I'm using ninths and sevenths just to spice it up a bit. So once you have this basic sound, you need to create another sound that will play more notes than this, because the time it takes for these notes to switch is pretty long. So here we have an ARP sound. Basically, it's just a piano sample at C5. It sounds like this. And I added a bunch of effects. I added some distortion, and I added some delay, some reverb, and some EQ to remove the very high end that the distortion creates. It sounds like this. So it doesn't sound too organic, it sounds a bit electronic. The next thing I did was I programmed it to play in arpeggio mode instead of just the chords. So this means that while I'm still putting the same MIDI that we had for the pad sound, it's going to arpeggiate these notes like this. And as you can hear, once you add the delay, you get a progressive sound that keeps evolving and stays very interesting. So the next thing you want to do is to decide whether you want to export each one of those separately or to export them all together. So I decided to export them all together, and I got this one out of it. But it's still pretty dry to be an atmospheric sound. So that's why we're adding some effects. So here's my track, and I created two effect buses. The first one is a short reverb one. It has a whole reverb of around 3 seconds at 100% wet. It has some dimension expanding and some additional whole reverb at just 40% wet. So the decay is pretty short. As you can hear, the sound decays after around like 5 seconds. And you can also add a low pass filter if you want, but I feel like reserving the high frequencies sounds a bit better. So here's how it sounds like. Which already sounds like an atmospheric pad. And I also made another effect bus, which is this one. And this one basically has very long reverbs. As you can see, 60 seconds on the decay time, and it's 100% wet. And then there's another one for an additional 13 seconds on also 100% wet. And then on the EQ, I'm just removing a lot of the low ends, and I'm boosting a bit of the highs. The next important thing to look at is that I've increased the volume all the way up, because while you let the reverb play and sort of gather, it gets really loud, and once it gets really loud, it starts to distort itself because it's passing the threshold for its volume, like this. And while this may sound unpleasant to some, it can create some additional textures that might be very unique for your pad sound. So it's something to consider, and if you don't want to, you can just set the volume to be much lower and just have this long reverb sound without all of the distortion, like this. Now the next thing to do after you have a very atmospheric sound is to add some noise to it. So you can add, for example, some vinyl crackles like these ones, or like rain samples. And as you can hear, I added some slight reverb to these samples, and I also removed the very low end because it's unnecessary and it's just going to collide with our bass note. It just adds some dimension to the sound and makes it sound wider, like this. And now that you have the sound, you can render it. So after rendering the pad that we made from the synth source, we get this audio. And now you can either just save it, or you can, for example, let it play notes that are higher in pitch to create a very unstable sound, because once you pitch it up, it sort of gets kind of weird with the pitching algorithm. So for example, if I'll play this note, it will sound slightly glitchy. And the higher you go, it will sound a bit weirder. Which can also create very unique textures as well. So I suggest saving the original and also saving a bunch of pitched up ones. So now let's go to the second way you can create these pads, which is more about recording various instruments or sounds. Here I have this sample, which is basically a guitar that I played. Normally it sounds like this. It's very distorted and loud, so what I did is I found a tiny bit that sounds good from it, like this one. It's a very small part, but it sounds pretty good. And then I took a small sort of like a kalimba sample, this one, and I made a chord out of it, which is this one. This chord is just F sharp minor, and then I also added the 7th on top, which is E. And what I did is I just took the notes and didn't let them play at the same time. I sort of started with the bass note, And then I started dragging them around the playlist a bit so that they sound not clustered up like this instead of this, because it sounds a bit more interesting and it gives it some more depth once you add some reverb. So let's add some reverb. You can add the short reverb, for example. And let's set our guitar sample to the long reverb. And just by adding the reverb to these LOD very interesting sounds, you get a very unique pad. And you can also, for example, route the short reverb to the long reverb. So you get a much longer reverb for our kalimba sound, like this. And just by combining a short melody that you made with a chord sound and then adding reverb to both of them, you can already create very unique sounds. And then once you add some, for example, rain ambience, it gets even cooler. Let's turn it up a bit. And then you can do the exact same thing. You can save it and then pitch it up and save it again. You can split these two and send them to different reverb buses or effects and save them as well. And that's how you make it. I'll put a download link in the description below to the Atomspheres created in this video and to the ambient samples we've used. If you found this tutorial helpful, make sure to give it a thumbs up and let me know in the comments below what subject you want me to cover up next time.